Hello and welcome to another episode of KARE 11 On the Record. I'm political reporter Danny Spewak. In less than 2 months, the Democratic and Republican parties in Minnesota are going to hold their party conventions, and they're going to make endorsements for the big November races. That includes one race that is somewhat under the radar at times, the race for state auditor. There are crowded, competitive fields on both sides to try to win the nomination for their party. We sat down with a couple of them this week. Let's start with GOP candidate Nate George. Well, thanks for coming to KARE 11 and joining us here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So you're running for the GOP endorsement and nomination for state auditor. First of all, just introduce yourself to the public. Just who are you and why are you running for the auditor position?
Yeah, my name's Mayor Nate George. I'm the mayor of Brand, Minnesota. It's about 1,800 people, right between Mora and Cambridge. I'm running for state auditor for the exact same reasons why I got into politics at the local level. I was asked to run. We had a city that was faced with a very dire financial situation, and I had something to say about that at a city council meeting, and people liked what I had to say, and they asked me to run. So we've since turned that city around financially. We're in the midst of a revival, we're calling it, and because of the success that we had there, a lot of people asked me to run for auditor as well and duplicate that success across the state.
On the GOP side, you're running against a couple of established candidates, have served in the state legislature, have experience at the state level, which you don't have. What do you believe makes you the most qualified candidate on the Republican side?
Yeah, well, when people actually study what the duties of the auditor are, it has nothing to do with being a state legislature. And so having that experience doesn't make you any more qualified than someone like me. Because the state auditor's office is actually only responsible for local government. They only have the statutory authority to audit and investigate local government. And so, in fact, I would say that I'm more qualified than those individuals because of that local government experience that I have. But also, my daytime job deals with government regulation and investigations. And so I lead a team of investigators that audits and investigates casinos here in Minnesota. And so we're investigating theft and fraud on a daily basis. We're building those cases, and those are translatable skills directly to what the auditor's office does.
It seems that the auditor's race sometimes gets overlooked. There's obviously, especially in a year where everything's on the ballot. Why do you think the public should care about the state auditor?
Well, it's one of the 5 constitutional offices. So if you were to look at it as like a ranking system, it's on the same level as the governor and the Secretary of State and the Attorney General and the Lieutenant Governor. And in fact, every one of those constitutional offices sits on the Executive Council, which is the mechanism in place that is meant to keep the governor in check. And so any kind of executive actions or emergency powers that the governor wants to take, it gets voted on by the Executive Council, and they have to approve it. And so aside from its daily role of auditing and overseeing local government, they have a direct role to play in the management of and operations of statewide government.
We've heard some candidates on both sides talk about expanding the role of the office to have more oversight of state agencies as it relates to fraud. Do you support expanding the office's authority?
Not before we change the mechanisms that are already in place. For example, it wouldn't do any good to expand the role of the state auditor to allow it to investigate and audit state agencies, because there's already an entity that does that. That's the legislative auditor's office. And so if we do that without fixing that, then you have duplication of effort, which is more wasteful spending.
How do you plan to woo some of the delegates on the Republican side? You got the convention coming up in a couple of months. How do you plan to make your mark in those areas?
So ever since I'm the longest running GOP candidate for auditor, I launched live from the Garage Logic podcast at the state fair. And ever since then, we've been touring around to local political party units across the state. We've been to over 50 counties in the state so far. Many events and conventions as well. And so we're spreading our message, and it's simple. This is our time to finally get somebody in this office. who's not a political pawn, who's not part of any political establishment, who's from the grassroots, hardworking, everyday Minnesotans like everybody else here that pays their taxes, but who happens to also know how to do the job because they have the background and hands-on experience doing it every single day. And so when you want real results, you got to get somebody in there who can actually bring real results because they know what they're doing. And that seems to really be resonating with folks, especially educating them on what the auditor's office does, because it's such a out of the limelight kind of a role. Most of the people I talk to don't even know that there is an auditor, and of course we don't learn about it anywhere in school. So it's really just educating folks about this office, what it can and cannot do under the law, and then what I can bring to the table as someone who has the direct experience in that role.
If you were the nominee, you'd be attempting to win a statewide race in Minnesota, which no Republican has done in about 20 years. How would you win a statewide election?
Well, I think I have a lot of proven history appealing to a bipartisan grassroots support network. I already have a lot of that bipartisan support from whether it's tribal nations that I work with in the casino industry to just regular grassroots, traditionally Democratic voters in the cities that I just happen to know and have been working on spreading my message. And I think I really come across as someone who's really more independent, even though I'm running as a particular party candidate, we have to. But I really take a real independent stance when it comes to making decisions that are taxpayer-focused, not party-focused. And I think that can be really appealing to anybody.
What would be some of your top priorities as the auditor when you're talking about your jurisdiction over local governments?
Yeah, so one of the things I've already started working on, again, because my experience and background enables me to come up with these kinds of solutions. I've already drafted a bill that is actually waiting to get a House file number as we speak. So it's working its way through the process as we speak. That would make law my fraud risk score concept. And the fraud risk score concept works similarly to like a credit score. And it grades every local government entity across the state on how well they mitigate fraud within their jurisdiction. And it judges them on certain things like, minimum internal control standards, separation of duties, fund balances, and things like that. And then you get an overall score that falls somewhere on a range from low to high risk. And then that information would be publicized on an online dashboard. So anyone could look it up for any county, city, school board, what have you. It would also make it so that the legislature would require a minimum fraud rating in order to qualify for any state funding. And so you would have to prove that you can protect our tax dollars before you've even asked for any state funding.
Getting back to just how you got into the race in the first place, at what point was it, well, obviously there's an open seat, the incumbent isn't running. At what point was it that you really decided you wanted to make an attempt for this?
Yeah, so first I had to, like anybody else, I had to research the position and really learn what it was about. I worked with the state auditor's office as a mayor. Every year we get audited and have to provide that information to the auditor's office. And as I started learning more and more about the position, I realized that it's pretty much what I do every single day. And so it would really just be something I could easily shift into, shift into no learning curve or very, very small learning curve, and just do what's right because the people need somebody who's going to look after their tax dollars right now. And people are feeling like that's not happening. And so because I have the skills and the knowledge to do it, I'm willing to step up to do it.
You described yourself as fairly independent-minded, even though you're running on the GOP side. Would you say you differ on major issues as it relates to the auditor's office with the GOP as a whole?
I would say not as a whole. I mean, the GOP certainly aligns with my values as far as being very fiscally conservative-minded. That's how I approach my city as well. We don't ask for more money than we need to run our government. We look for ways to save money and provide cost savings to the taxpayers, and that's exactly what we should be emulating across the state in every local jurisdiction. We shouldn't be asking for more money from taxpayers than we need, and we're in that situation now where we're coupled with maybe local entities getting a little bit greedy, and coupled with unfunded state mandates pushing responsibilities down to the local level, taxpayers are getting squeezed out of their homes. And so that's really where my biggest priority is protecting the taxpayer, making sure that that's not happening.
Mayor George, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back. As we continue our sit-down interviews with all of the auditor candidates vying for the Republican and Democratic nominations, we're talking to a DFL candidate today, Ben Schierer, former mayor of Fergus Falls, Minnesota, who talked with us about his campaign and his vision for the auditor's role. Well, thank you for coming to KARE 11 and joining us. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be with you, Danny.
Yes, we have a very competitive process here, really in both parties for the state auditor's race, and more eyeballs on it now. What prompted you to get into this race?
Yeah, well, I've served 16 years in local government and 2 terms as mayor of Fergus Falls. I know how close that office is to local government. And so when our current auditor, Julie Blaha, announced that she was not running, I thought that here's an opportunity for me to serve in a capacity that can really help local government. It's what I've done my entire career, is focused on local governments. And, a lot of the candidates are going to talk about the opportunity to help local governments, because there is no office closer to local government. So yeah, when Julie announced that she was not running, that was when I decided, hey, this is an office where I can help local governments across the state.
As you seek the endorsement of delegates and you look at the convention here in less than 2 months now, what will be your pitch at the convention to try to win the endorsement? You're someone that you don't specifically have state experience, although you have a lot of local experience.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things really to our campaign. First of all, it is that connection to local government. I mentioned 16 years of serving as a local elected official, 2 terms as mayor, twice elected as a rural progressive in one of the reddest parts of the state. I say that, but it's really important. And I know how important the programs that the auditor oversees and touches through the boards that they serve on, programs like tax increment financing, programs like housing, in the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. Those programs are critical to local communities. And so my experience in local government, the 16 years I've built relationships across the state with local leaders. During that time through the League of Minnesota Cities, a coalition of greater Minnesota cities, I was one of the original Minnesota mayors together. So those relationships matter. I also, my degree from the Humphrey Institute is in public affairs. I was a Bush Fellow, a New Deal leader, and a presidential leadership scholar. And I say all that simply because all of that work was focused on strengthening local government, building relationships, and bridging the rural-urban divide. So that's that local government pitch. I have deep experience in there. That's one of the we can help local governments move forward. And the second pitch is pretty simple. As a Democrat, the DFL in Minnesota, if we're going to be a party for the entire state, I firmly believe that we have to have candidates from the entire state who've lived and served and worked in some of the communities that we've lost as a party over the last couple of decades. So making those connections, there's a real opportunity, I think, for Democrats to win back some of the voters that we've lost. And I think we need candidates, again, who have served in those communities. So that's my pitch to DFL delegates. And it seems to, I think in a year, in 2026, I think people recognize that we need to be a party not simply for the Twin Cities metropolitan area, but for the entire state. And that's the message I'm bringing, and it seems to be well received.
I've been asking various candidates the same question. When it comes to the auditor's race, it's kind of under the radar at times. Why should the public care about who the state auditor is?
Yeah, I think that it is. A lot of people, they don't know what the state auditor does. I think that in and of itself is an opportunity to teach people, the importance of this position and the oversight of $60 billion in local government spending. I mean, those are local tax dollars, making sure that local elected officials have the tools and resources they need to spend those tax dollars, our tax dollars effectively and efficiently. I mean, that is critical work. And, the functioning of local government affects our daily lives. Like there's no level of government that is closer to your daily lives. The snow plows, turning on your water, local police and fire, public parks, all the things that make our daily lives, function are responsibilities of the local government. So I think that the oversight of those tax dollars, and also not just the oversight, that is critically important, but also making sure they have the tools and resources that those local leaders need to do everything they can. Like those people are elected to local office because they care about the future of their communities, and we need to support them and make sure that they have those tools and resources to make sure that those communities thrive.
Even though the auditor's role, sometimes some people don't understand it's looking at local governments, but the issue of fraud has still become intertwined in the race. Would you support expanding the authority of the office to look at state agencies more specifically?
No, I don't think that's necessary. I do think that there's opportunities to stop fraud, to make sure that we have accountable and transparent government. But specifically expanding the office to look at state agencies, no. There's a bill right now currently, as you know, for the Inspector General. I think that does that. The Office of Legislative Auditor currently oversees those state agencies. I think they've produced reports that the legislature should look at. So not specifically to. I think that would be a disservice to local units of government. I think we need to focus on local units of government. If there's any if there's any opportunities to expand this office at this point when the public is focused on fraud, which they should be, right? There's the fraud that we're seeing is unacceptable. Democrats, Republicans are going to talk, and rightfully so, because it's unacceptable. We have to stop it. But there's opportunities to do that through local governments, right? And making sure that those local governments are accountable. But also, it's not just the fraud; it's the inefficiencies in local government. And so I think one way that I've talked about doing that is through performance audits. And if you look at right now, currently the State Auditor's Office performs financial and compliance audits on local units of government, which are, looking at, are we doing things right? And I think that's important. But I think performance audits allow us an opportunity to ask, are we doing the right things looking forward, right? So it's like I say, well, I'm not interested in simply performing autopsies. We have to cut the cancer out where it starts and before it spreads. And we can do that with performance audits, making sure that, we're asking, are we doing things, are we doing the right things? Do we have the right programs in place through things like internal controls, security, cyber IT, security, et cetera, to make sure that, that these taxpayer dollars stopping fraud, but also that there's efficiencies at a time when local governments are a breaking point on property taxes. Something there's efficiencies out there. The example that I like to give is the Washington State, the Office of the State Auditor in Washington State does the financial oversight of the local government, but they also do performance audits. It costs about $15 million. They do it through an enterprise fund, so it's not directly to the taxpayers. And there's 2,600 local units of government that they do. But anyway, the bottom line is they've also created a Center for Government Innovation, so other local units of government can learn from one another through that department. But also, for every dollar that they invest in those performance audits, they return $16 to local taxpayers. So there's efficiencies out there, but we have to look forward and think what are the programs and policies that we have to put in place to protect those taxpayer dollars, but also make sure there's efficiencies in local government.
How would you approach the job differently, if you would approach it differently, than the current auditor, Julie Blaha?
I think Julie's done a wonderful job at a time when Republicans have tried to, undermine that office, and there's been attacks and tried to reduce the capacity of that office. I think she's done a terrific job of stabilizing that office, and she's also done a wonderful job of connecting with local governments. I think now we can take it a step further and make sure that those, the programs that they oversee, like make sure that we bring the voices of local government around those. We got to support working families in this. As a mayor of a local community, I know how important some of those programs are. And I think that experience, it's not necessarily doing it differently, but it's just going to expand how that office can connect with local governments and bring the voices of local communities into the decisions of the state. That's the one thing I see at the legislature too often with all the divide and all the divisions. You look at a map, you can clearly see it's red and blue. I think there's an opportunity to bring those voices of local elected officials. They don't necessarily care about Democrat, Republican. They just want policies that work for their communities. So around housing, for example, there's examples of housing policies that are working in local communities. Make sure we bring those voices to the state. And around tax increment financing, I think there's policies sometimes made in St. Paul don't always work perfectly out there in the world, and small units of government. There's a lot of really small units of government that are working with sometimes part-time clerks and treasurers. Make sure that make sure that there's people in that auditor's office that understand all of the communities in our state. So that's really making those connections. Again, that's not anything that I would do necessarily different than Julie's done, because she has made those connections with local government. But I think the opportunity to expand those and bring those voices into state policy decisions is one thing I would focus on.
The race 4 years ago with Julie Blaha and Ryan Wilson, the Republican nominee, was very close. It was like less than a percentage point. Would you be prepared for another close race if you were to be the nominee?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you look at Minnesota politics, we're a purple state. There has been the statewide elections have gone to Democrats, but like you mentioned, there's been close elections. So I think in a time when there's a lot of focus on accountability in local governments, people are going to be looking at that auditor's race, right? I have experience as a mayor of Fergus Falls. One thing I talk about on day one as the auditor, I want to make sure that we have statewide hotlines, not only for the public, but also work with local governments to make sure they have the resources to have internal hotlines within local units of government for employees on the front line. That's something that we did while I was mayor of Fergus Falls, long before fraud was in the headlines. So that's not a campaign promise. I can talk about the things that I've done at the local level that I think will resonate with voters, and I think also making that connection with Greater Minnesota and making sure that that everyone in this state feels like the government is working for them and building those bridges. And if you look at some of the endorsements we've received, we're proving that that's possible, right? Like we're bridging the rural-urban divide. So I think that's how, I think that's what Minnesotans want at this time, and that's what our campaign is all about.
Okay, Mr. Schierer, appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Danny.
Welcome back. Speaking of the state auditor's race, there's been a major development on the Republican side with the recent DWI arrest of candidate and state representative Elliot Engen on Friday, March 27th. Now the conduct of Engen, as well as a fellow Republican state legislator, are in question.
Should this bill go forward, I'd love to see those changes made. Thank you.
Last Thursday, GOP Representative Elliot Engen actively participated in the first portion of a 1 p.m. House Education Finance Committee meeting, along with fellow Republican Walter Hudson.
Am I understanding that correctly?
By approximately 2 p.m., though, both of their chairs were empty, and within a half hour,
it's crazy times we live in, man.
Food delivery driver and former nonpartisan House staffer Brian Basham took a photo of Engen and Hudson a mile away at his St. Paul burger joint.
Sitting at a table watching the Twins game and having a couple of drinks.
Later that afternoon, both lawmakers took votes during a tense House floor session. Hudson criticized DFL members for not supporting a bill related to age verification for online pornographic material.
Your age has to be verified. That's all it does. That's all it does.
Meanwhile, Engen spoke against DFL proposals to ban assault weapons, saying he prefers to increase school safety funding.
There's so many faces across the room that I've had great conversations with about how we could do something about this issue because it means a hell of a lot to me.
Several hours after the floor session ended, around 1:50 a.m. Friday, Engen was pulled over by White Bear Lake police and booked for DWI. According to a police report, Engen repeatedly denied drinking at first before admitting to having 2 beers at a bar in White Bear Lake. The report also says that Hudson was a passenger in the car carrying a legal firearm that he turned over voluntarily, although he wasn't charged with any crime. While both lawmakers have apologized, neither have addressed the photo that surfaced of them earlier Thursday afternoon.
The state of Minnesota is paying them to be here working, and they weren't here working. And if it was a Democrat and he wasn't, I would be just as upset. Thanks for joining us on KARE 11 on the Record. Remember, you can stream us every Sunday at 8 a.m. and find us on demand as well.